Welcome. And we'll start, of course, with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I just want to remind you to be on mute unless you have a question, etc., because sometimes there is feedback from the microphones. So with that, we are going to go into the share and continue with what we're talking about. And of course, we are talking about the consumption of meat. That's what we're doing. So, verse 22. Ach ka'asher ya'achel et hatzvi et hayal. So we've had this verse before, and it's going to come now in a different context. So, however, right, acha, it's some kind of it's kind of some kind of limiting phrase. Ka'asher ya'achel, just as hatzvi et hayal, the deer and the gazelle is eaten. Ya'achel is a passive voice, is eaten. Kain tuchlenu, thus you shall eat it. And we're talking now, of course, about regular meat, the kind of meat we go to the kosher butcher to purchase. So he's saying you should eat it like the deer and the gazelle, hatameh v'hatahor. And this would seem to be the point that's being made. But there's going to be some kind of limitation regarding the deer and the gazelle. So the impure and the pure, you do not have to be in a state of purity to eat this meat, whereas in distinction to sanctified meat, any meat that's somehow connected to the altar, you have to be in a state of purity. Hatameh v'hator yachdav yochlenu. Together they shall eat it. So here, ach kasher ye'achel et hatzvi. However, like the deer and the gazelle, it shall be eaten. Eincha muzhar le'ochlan betara. So you are not, in fact, you have not been given a negative commandment. You have not been prohibited, I'll say, to consume it in a state of purity. I ma tzvi v'ayal. If just as tzvi, the deer, v'ayal, and the gazelle, chelban mutar, they're chalev, right? So I will translate I as if. So if just as the deer and the gazelle, their fat is permissible meaning you can consume that fat. Af chulin chelban mutar. You might think in that case that since the Torah is telling us that we're able to eat regular meat from cows and from sheep, like a deer and a gazelle in a state of impurity, we might think that the Torah is going as far as saying that, and just like the fat of the deer and the gazelle is permissible, we can do that too. We can consume the fat of these animals that are non-sacrificial. Talmud lomar ach. For that reason, Scripture teaches the word ach. As I said, the ach is a word that is understood to limit in some sense the application of a law. And that's the limitation. The limitation here is that you can eat it in a state of impurity. However, it doesn't go as far as giving you permission to eat the chalev of sheep or cattle. It does not do that, right? Okay. So we have this idea. So in fact, those parts are removed when there's shechita. So you might ask me about the marbling in your steak. Does that mean you can't consume the marbling that you might find in your rib steak? And the answer is that is not considered chalev. Chalev is a very thick kind of fat that generally comes apart from the muscle easily. And it's not considered the part that we're talking about in the rib steak or that part of meat, the marbling, is called shomen. It's not called chalev. So there's a technical distinction between that kind of fat, and the part that used to get put on the altar was the chalev. Certain chalev parts were placed on the altar as part of the imurim. So you can see there, it's interesting. There are these very specific elements in our relationship to God, right? This is all considered holy work, that when we observe these kinds of things, that it's the way in which we become very conscious and bring God into our lives in a very deep kind of way, because our lives are affected by divine commandment. So I know there are people who say, does God really, it's an old argument, does God really care about what dishes you keep and whether you separate them? And that is the wrong question to ask. By the way, if there is somebody who is unmuted, please mute so that we don't have the additional sound. Thank you. So understanding kashrut, the best way I've had to explain it is it's not a rational commandment, it's a chok, and yet it is exactly these chukim that if we in fact practice them, demonstrate clearly our love of God. And we're told to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. And those generalizations are meaningless unless we apply them in specific ways. And so every time we perform a mitzvah, and the degree of concern we have about and the specificity of that mitzvah is a way of demonstrating clearly and acting out the love that we have for God. That is a sort of basis of Judaism and how it works. And in making Adonai your Elohim, that's part of what we say. When we're saying Adonai Eloheinu in the Shema, or whenever we use that term, Adonai Eloheinu, we are saying that we believe in God, but not only do we believe in a divine source of the world, but we also believe in making that divine source influence us and intimately connected to who we are and how we live our lives. And I personally, of course, find that very powerful in terms of giving life purpose. So here we're just, and in examining this, I think they're just such beautiful examples of how in analyzing this text, the way we're learning how to actually apply the text and not just have it as some idealistic issue. Onwards, another rock. So another limitation, right? Chazak, be strong, the vilti achol hadam, not to consume the blood. Ki hadam hu hanefesh, for the blood is the soul. In other words, we consider the blood to, in a sense, contain the life. So we talk about life blood, but the blood, in a sense, represents the very life of the animal. Velo, going on, velo tochal hanefesh im habasar, so that you do not consume the life of the animal with the flesh, with the meat. And we know, some of you already know, that there's the issue of the fact that after the meat is slaughtered properly, and it's slaughtered in a way so that a lot of the blood escapes from the animal in that process, that you actually, after the meat is cut up, it has to be soaked in order to soften the meat, and then salted in order to remove the salt, actually removes all the blood, the basic blood that's in the meat. And I know that there's still some redness, there's some blood that's left even in any meat. You go and buy meat, you'll always find what appears to be a little blood. That blood is so thin and so diluted with the water that it is not the same. It's not considered blood in the same way that like the blood that flows through the arteries and the veins. And the truth is that blood is a lot thicker than the blood that we find in the meat, which is not considered, we're not consuming blood when we're consuming a rare steak or something like that. Okay. So again, this need to be careful and to define things and to try and look at all the circumstances that go along with this. So Rashi, Rak chazek, but be strong. the vilti achol hadam, not to consume the blood. And where Rashi's going to go on this is actually goes into some human psychology here. Mimash ne'emar chazek, right? From the fact that Scripture says, "Be strong," right? You don't need Rashi for you to know that if it's saying "be strong," it means that there's a great temptation to do this, right? And that we have to fight ourselves in a sense in order not to do that. Now, so we are seeing. Here we go. Atal lamed, you learn from this, you can infer from this, shahayu shtufim badam leochlo, that they were, when we say shtufim, it means they were carried away, is what how Jastra translates the word shtufim. I think the word addicted might be applicable here, that at least in that generation when this commandment was given, is that they were addicted to consume blood. They enjoyed doing it. And for this reason, it was necessary for Scripture to tell us, chazek, right? To be strong. You have to be strong about this. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is the opinion, this is the interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda. And by the way, just to remind you, remember what I said, the subtext of the written Torah, which is what we're studying, is doing what doesn't come naturally, right? So saying it's human nature is not an argument to do something that is immoral or sinful or anything just because we are tempted, deeply tempted to do it. It's not an excuse. But this is one explanation that Rashi's sharing with us. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai Omer, however, Rabbi Shimon ben Azai Omer says, and this is such a lovely example of the fact that our tradition appreciates complexity and not simplicity. And the fact that here Rashi is giving you an example of how there are these disputes, there are differences of opinion between sages, between authorities, and they are all preserved. They're preserved. So that's part of trying to get down to the truth, because we know that truth is actually complex, very complex. And I love, there's a saying out there that I'd heard, which is to every complicated problem, there's a simple solution and it's wrong. And we see, of course, that going on so much because people look for simple solutions. And it's tempting. And again, doing what doesn't come naturally is to accept the fact that complex problems have complex solutions. And by the way, I'd go so far as to say maybe simple problems have complex solutions. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai says, Lo ba hakatuv. This scriptural text is only coming, in other words, is coming only lahazhircha ulalamedcha, to warn you, in other words, to prohibit something from you're doing something, ulalamedcha, and to teach you, to give you a further insight. Here we go. Ad kama ata tzarich lehitchazek b'mitzvot. To what degree you have to be very strong to perform mitzvot. You have to really work at it. So, im hadam, shehu kal lishamer, if regarding blood, which is a simple matter to observe mimenu of it, she'ein adam mitavelo, because how many human beings really look and desire to drink blood? I'm sure there's not a single person, certainly in our current room, but I suspect that would apply to if you're listening to this lesson right now. The probabilities of anyone really looking forward to a good glass of blood is very, very unlikely. I suppose if you're Dracula, maybe you do, but let's be honest about it. People don't like it, and that's what he's saying. That it's not a difficult thing, right? That the Torah needs to say, "Be strong, not to do it," right? And it's nothing difficult. the Torah probably didn't need to tell you that. For you not to drink blood. But here the Torah is doing that. And if the Torah is telling you you've got to be strong about something that under normal circumstances you wouldn't desire anyway, Kal vachomer, how much the more so do you need to be strong, right? Do you need to gird yourself up, l'sha'ar mitzvot, regarding the rest of the mitzvot? So it's, as I said, human psychology. And the fact that people are not into performing mitzvot is clear demonstration how we have to work hard at it. It's not something that necessarily comes easily. Velo tochal, do not consume hanefesh im habasar, the soul with in other words, the life of the animal with the flesh. And again, quoting from the Talmud Chulin and the Sifrei, the Midrash on Deuteronomy, Azhara, this is a negative commandment. This is a prohibition. The Ever min hachai. This is a practice that used to go on. Ever min hachai means a limb from the living animal. And before there was refrigeration, there was apparently a practice where they would amputate an animal in order to consume that amputated limb. And of course, the animal would still remain alive, but that is considered to be forbidden. It's actually, I believe, one of the 7 Noahide laws. And under that general category comes a prohibition against cruelty to animals, which is part of Jewish tradition. So,
can I
please
tell you what mine says? It says it's an admonition against the eating of the last blood oozing from the incision of slaughtering.
Okay, so that I think is coming up. Ever min hachai is definitely something else. Let's see if that actually comes up. Yeah, that's coming up. That's in the next. Tamtzit. That's the next comment. That's verse 24. We're on verse 23. We'll get to it.
But my Rashi says that. Oh, you're right. It had switched. So you're right. It had, right. I must have touched the screen.
It's okay.
Sorry.
No problem. No problem. So going on. And so there are these severe prohibitions about consuming blood, which is why.
What about the Maasai?
Say that again. I'm sorry. What about
the Maasai tribes in Africa?
I know. It's a good question. I don't feel that I am sufficiently knowledgeable to in fact do this, and whether the Maasai in fact might not have to do such a thing, I don't know. I actually read a very fascinating book. It's called Indaba, My Children, Indaba, My Children. It is actually out there, written by a Zulu witch doctor, in which he shares the oral tradition of the Bantu tribes. Now, the Bantu are not the Maasai, but they also originate in Central Africa. When the white man was coming up Africa from the Cape and moving out into Africa, the Bantu were coming south at that time. The people that lived there, just to fill that in, because it wasn't uninhabited, there were Bushmen and Hottentots who lived in that area at the time. And basically, I think there are, in fact, still a few Bushmen who live in the Kalahari Desert. I think that the Hottentots were basically wiped out through smallpox. At any rate, I don't know. I can't speak for their culture, but this is a mitzvah to, the fact that it's a Noahide law, Judith, of course, implies that all human beings are supposed to practice this. So I don't know. I can't speak for it, and I don't know exactly how the Maasai practice this either. So good question. Okay, lo tochlenu, you shall not consume it. So it said again, right? Do not consume it. Al haaretz tishpachenu kamayim. You shall pour it out on the earth like water. Now, this is mentioned more than once. This comparison of the blood to water. So there are these special drushes that are applied to, or interpretations that are applied to these verses. So, lo tuchlenu, you shall not consume it. And here we are, what you said, Lauren, azhara, it's a prohibition, ledam hatamtzit, for the lost blood oozing out of the vein, which is, so not even that, you're not allowed to have any blood whatsoever. So what the interpreters are doing with this verse is to say, why this repetition, since a blood has been forbidden, and it's saying even the very last bit of it. It's to that degree. Going on, here we go. Another, lo tochlenu, you shall not consume it. Lema'an yitav lacha, so that it go well for you, ulevanecha acharecha, and your children following you. Ki ta'aseh, for you shall be doing hayashar, that which is right, be'enei Hashem, in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the Lord. So there's also interesting, right? That there's also a reward attached for doing this. And we'll take a look at the Rashi here. There's a lovely Rashi on this. Lo tochlenu, you shall not consume it, right? So this is azhara ledam ha'evarim. This is a prohibition against consuming the blood that is found in the limbs. Lema'an yitav lacha, in order that it shall go well with you. And this is taken from Tractate Makot, page 23. Se vilamed, go out and learn. In other words, consider this. Matan scharan shel mitzvot, the reward that one earns for performing commandments. In other words, here we are being told the reward for not consuming blood, right? For performing a negative commandment. And here is the implication. Im hadam, if with regard to blood, nafsho shel adam katsa mimenu, which for literally it means the soul of a person, detests, right? Something that we find disgusting. The idea of drinking blood, right? Haporesh mimenu zochelo. So one who avoids drinking blood. And this is a natural thing for us most of us, right? Maybe not the Maasai, but again, I don't know exactly how the Maasai practice what we understand they do, okay? But definitely I would think that most people, most of the inhabitants of the world don't want to drink blood. So, nevertheless, the Torah in prohibiting it says, "Zochel lo ulvanav." A person who is now practicing this commandment, this negative commandment, he merits, right? He gains merit for himself and his offspring after him. So not only does the person who performs this mitzvah gain merit, but he also gains merit for his children, for his descendants. Kal vachomer, how much the more so would this be true? La gezel, if you avoid theft, right? If you don't practice theft, the arayot, and sexual immorality, shenafsho shel adam mitaveh lahem, regarding which a person craves them, desires them. So the temptation to steal, the temptation to commit sexual immorality is deep. And if it's so, and if those are things where one has to fight oneself in order to practice those things, can you imagine what the reward is? So there's a beautiful, this is a beautiful, memorable Rashi quoting the Talmud regarding the benefit of performing mitzvot and what a privilege it is. And it would seem to me, let's see, okay, I think this is actually a good place for us to stop and to pick it up, God willing, next year. So I'm putting this here, and with God's help, we will continue this next year. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Any thoughts, any reactions, any comments? I think there's some beautiful stuff that we were looking at. So
I was wondering about about the purity and impurity. When I go to a funeral, I'm under the tent. Then they say Shiva is right after that. If we're going to pray, how do we get pure again to pray to God?
So you don't have to be in a state of purity to pray to God. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The truth is that there's a rabbinic level of impurity, and this is a very complex and deep subject, Harlan. You only have to be in a state of purity when it comes to temple worship. And in fact, there's generally a sense of a prohibition on walking on the site of the temple. So for us now to actually go and walk on the temple site, that's not at the Western Wall. The Western Wall is outside the temple precinct. But to go on into the area like of the Mosque of Omar or Al-Aqsa for a Jew is supposedly not permissible. Shirabeth, I don't know if you've heard that yourself, but that's my understanding.
That's an opinion that
Oh, go ahead.
was very well known for a long time. Now there's some like more what seem to be like more extremist types who say otherwise. But yeah, that's an opinion.
So yeah, okay.
You shouldn't go up. The Jews shouldn't go up to the Temple Mount because you don't know exactly where the Kodesh HaKodeshim was.
Exactly. And not only that, again, you weren't even supposed to go into the temple area if you were in a state of impurity. I was thinking of something. Oh, whether or not
People do wash their hands when they leave the cemetery.
right.
I don't know, Harlan, is that what you're thinking about?
Well, no, I don't understand. I know you wash your hands, but are you still, you can't be pure that way.
No,
No,
was.
you need that red heifer. We can't do it.
Nobody's
till we get the red
pure. Yeah,
heifer.
none of us
Yeah,
are
we
pure,
don't
really.
have
Okay. None of us are in a state of purity, Harlan. And in order to reinstitute the temple worship, that would involve finding a red heifer, creating the situation with the ashes. It would be very complicated. And believe me, that life was complicated back then over these particular issues. I was going to say before I have to I'll leave you this morning, is that there is an argument whether or not that the sanctity of the temple is still there, even if it no longer exists. So because there are those who, and this is an old dispute and our disagreement as to whether the temple, that once the temple site was determined, that the sanctity of the temple site was going to be there, whether the temple itself existed there or whether the temple doesn't exist there. And and I imagine that most are of the opinion that the holiness of the temple site remains in its area, despite the fact that it's destroyed. So that discussion of whether you can go walk there or not is based on that particular point of view. And so I'm going to end the recording with this and thank those who have watched all the way through.